I was trying to sit up, but the world tilted. Not just dizzy, but heavy. Like someone had filled my insides with gravel after breakfast. This was how I knew something was terribly wrong. I used to be sturdy. 69 years I'd spent hunched over a sewing machine, stitching dreams and fixing torn skirts for half the neighborhood. I built this small apartment with my husband, piece by piece, saving every penny. It was safe. It was mine. Now I was just Dottie, the little old lady who couldn't stop the noises in her stomach. It wasn't a quick sickness. It was slow, humiliating, and heavy. The nausea hit first thing, a tiny tremor, like the building was shaking just for me. Then came the gas, persistent, embarrassing. It followed me everywhere. I felt utterly dirty, contaminated. How could I face Mrs. Henderson for coffee when my body was betraying me like that? I stopped going to the church luncheons. I stopped answering the phone. I lost 13 pounds in 2 months. I wasn't trying to lose weight. I was scared to eat anything. Every bite felt like I was feeding the monster inside me. I told myself it had to be serious. It had to be cancer. Some rare disease only old widows got when they lived alone. Arthur, my only child, is a doctor. A real important doctor with expensive shoes and a way of talking that makes you feel stupid for being sick. I reminded myself of that when the shame got too heavy. He took me to the hospital. He ran all the tests. Endoscopy, colonoscopy. All those big words they use to pretend they know everything. He looked at me one afternoon, running a hand through that perfect, expensive haircut. He sighed, a big, tired sigh. "Mom, we've done the blood work. We did everything. The specialists all agree. It's likely just anxiety. It's your age, Dottie. You need to accept that we're not spring chickens anymore." I wanted to scream. This wasn't anxiety. Anxiety didn't make my stomach feel like it was twisting into a hard, painful knot after one piece of plain toast. But he was the doctor. I tried to argue, but he just smiled politely and left another bottle of pills. Pills for gastritis, pills for reflux, pills for nervous intestines. None of them worked. They just made me foggy. The problem wasn't just Arthur. It was Brenda, Arthur's wife. Brenda is sharp, ambitious. She doesn't see a home. She sees money. Brenda came over every Sunday, and instead of asking how I felt, she would look around the living room. She hated my old furniture. She hated the wallpaper I had picked out 30 years ago. "This area is getting crowded, Dottie," she chirped one day, watching me struggle to stand up from the sofa. "It's just too much upkeep for you. Arthur and I were discussing the idea of a facility." A cold shot went through my heart. A facility? I'm sick, Brenda. I'm not mentally incapable. I can manage my home. "Oh, we know you can manage," Brenda said. Her voice was too sweet, like cheap syrup poured over garbage. "But think of the care. Full-time nurses. And that apartment. It would be such a good investment for your future care. Wouldn't it, Arthur?" Arthur didn't look at me. He just mumbled in agreement. They weren't seeing Dottie, the hard-working mother who sacrificed every spare dollar for Arthur's education. They didn't see a woman fighting for her health. They saw a valuable piece of real estate attached to a rapidly deteriorating inconvenience. The more I heard them discuss my needs and the financial benefits of putting me away, the worse I felt. The sickness became constant. I truly believed I was dying, and my own son and daughter-in-law were simply waiting for the inevitable so they could cash in. It was like I was trapped in a bad movie, but I was the only one who didn't know the ending. I started noticing patterns. The sickness always spiked hard on Monday mornings, always after their Sunday visit. They always brought groceries, claiming they were stocking up for me, putting everything away so I wouldn't have to lift a finger. Arthur was obsessive about storage. He'd stand there putting the potatoes in the fridge next to the milk. He'd stick the fresh bread in the bottom drawer. "It keeps the food fresh, Mom." He'd insist, like I was an idiot who'd never run a kitchen before. No sense risking bacteria. I used to think, you live and learn. Maybe they teach new food tricks in medical school. But the bread would turn hard and the potatoes seemed to get sweeter, almost soggy, in just a day or two. And after eating a meal with those things, that bag of rocks in my stomach felt like it was expanding, trying to burst out. I couldn't tell anyone. If I told Mrs. Henderson that my doctor's son was making me sick, they'd say I was losing my mind. The sickness was bad enough. Being called crazy was worse. I had to wait. I had to watch. One evening, after another long day of pain that felt intentional, I lay on the couch. I pretended to doze off. I was exhausted, but I forced my eyes shut. I had to hear them. They came back unexpectedly. They must have forgotten the expensive briefcase Arthur always carried. They didn't even bother to whisper, confident I was too weak or too medicated to notice. Brenda's voice cut through the silence. She sounded irritated, like a business deal was running late. "The Sunrise home costs a fortune, Arthur. We need the full proceeds of this apartment if we are going to afford the down payment on the lake house. She's only been in bed for 3 months. Is that enough proof of failure for the paperwork? What if she starts improving?" I felt my heart stop. Improving? Did she sound disappointed? Arthur's response came next. It was soft, chillingly casual, a sound I knew I would hear forever, echoing in my empty apartment. "She won't improve, dear," Arthur said flatly. "My son, the successful doctor." He didn't sound tired anymore. He sounded calm, determined. He said, "The specialist told us there's no cure for this anxiety. And besides, I made sure of something. Her condition is getting worse, not better. We just need to wait a few more weeks until she can't get up anymore." I made sure of something. The air rushed out of my lungs. I wasn't dying of some rare disease. I was being murdered by my own son. Not with a gun, not with a knife, but with careful, planned neglect, disguised as medical care. He was waiting for me to fail. He was making me fail. Lying there, listening to the silence of their departure, I didn't feel sick anymore. I felt cold. A deep, cold rage that pushed the rocks out of my stomach and replaced them with burning clarity. I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't die in this bed. I would not let them win. But I had to know what. What was he doing? And how? I had to find the proof before he finished what he started. The acting wasn't over. It was just starting. I stayed silent for another hour, listening to the street sounds. When I finally forced myself to get up, I walked straight to the kitchen. My legs were shaky, but my resolve was solid granite. I looked at the fridge. I looked at the bread drawer. I looked at the potatoes Arthur insisted on keeping cold, claiming it was for my safety. I didn't know what the truth was yet, but I knew my son was a lie, and I was going to prove it. I felt the cold floor under my feet, but I didn't feel the weakness anymore. That conversation, Arthur's voice saying, "I made sure of something." It had been a terrible shock, but it had also been a shot of adrenaline right into my old heart. I wasn't just sick, I was a target. And suddenly, my mind, which had been foggy with pills and pain for months, was clear. I started pretending I was weaker. That was the first rule. Arthur and Brenda had to believe the sickness was doing its job. I only got out of bed when they weren't around, moving slowly, testing my strength. The nausea was still there, a twist in my gut. But now I looked at it differently. It wasn't random pain. It was a clue. I started watching the clock. Every Monday morning, after their Sunday visit, the pain was worst. The gas, the bloating, the heaviness. It was crippling. I started writing it down in a tiny notebook I kept under my mattress. Sunday, Arthur brings the groceries. He puts things away. Monday, the rocks in my stomach are worse than usual. I can't stand up straight. Tuesday, a little better, but still feel like I swallowed a balloon. Arthur always said he was so careful. He was a doctor, after all. He knew about cleanliness. He knew about food safety. But I remembered the potatoes. Big bagged potatoes, sitting on the bottom shelf of my refrigerator right next to the milk. He said the cold kept them fresh and stopped bacteria. I remembered the loaf of fresh bakery bread, squeezed into the bottom drawer of the fridge. He said that was the best way to keep it from molding. I used to think, you live and learn. Maybe these were just new rules for old things. But that bread, it went hard and stale, faster than bread ever should. And the potatoes, they got mushy and tasted too sweet, almost slimy after a day or two. I had always cooked those spoiled things, trying not to waste them, and every single time the bag of rocks in my stomach would swell up until I was sweating from the pain. If Arthur was poisoning me, it wasn't with anything fast or loud. It was slow. It was humiliating. It was just enough to make me look like I was failing, like I was losing my mind, so they could take my home. I couldn't accuse him yet. Who would believe me? The successful doctor's son, the sweet wife, and the paranoid old lady claiming her only child was poisoning her with cold potatoes? I needed help, but I needed help from someone they would never even notice, someone they treated like they were invisible. That person was Lydia Rodriguez, the building superintendent. Lydia was in her late 50s, strong and always moving. She was the one who fixed the leaky faucets and changed the burnt-out bulbs. Arthur and Brenda treated her like she was furniture. Just the help. Perfect. The next Tuesday, after Arthur's visit, I waited until Lydia was cleaning the laundry room on the ground floor. I pulled my old robe tight around me and crept downstairs. "Lydia," I whispered, my voice shaking even though I tried to sound steady. "I need to ask you something important, something secret." Lydia paused her folding machine. She looked at my face, really looked at me, not with pity, but with concern. "Dottie, what is it? You look pale." I took a deep breath. "I think Arthur is making me sick. With the food." Lydia didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just nodded slowly. "Tell me exactly what you mean, Dottie." I explained the pattern, the crippling pain on Mondays, the heavy gas, and I explained Arthur's storage rules. "He puts the bread, the onions, and the potatoes in the refrigerator," I said, trying not to cry. "He says it's best for safety. He says it stops bacteria." Lydia listened, leaning back against the washing machine. When I finished, a little line appeared between her eyebrows. "Dottie," she said, her voice dropping. "He's not keeping them fresh. He's making them spoil in a very specific, quiet way. He's a doctor. He knows better." Lydia pulled out her phone, an old Sensible model. She started typing, and then she turned the screen toward me. "Look at this. My mother was diabetic, so I had to learn about food chemistry." Lydia explained. "Potatoes. When you put them in the refrigerator, the cold converts the starch to sugar. This article says that can increase the sugar content by as much as 300% in just 2 weeks. It's like feeding you poison, Dottie. And when you cook them, that reaction creates something called acrylamide, which they say is a carcinogen. Your stomach feels like rocks because you are trying to digest something that is almost pure, chemically altered sugar and dangerous compounds. 300%. It was a number, a solid, awful fact that hit harder than any vague diagnosis of anxiety. I felt a dizzy spell come over me. I sat down right on the laundry bench. And the bread. He makes the bread hard. Refrigeration accelerates staling, Lydia confirmed, tapping the screen again. 6 times over, the article says. It just makes the food indigestible. And the onions and garlic, Dottie, they go soft in the cold, damp air and develop mold very fast. Mold causes toxins, like aflatoxins, that hit your gut and liver hard. It's what's causing the severe gas and bloating. He's using common knowledge and twisting it, knowing you'd trust him. Arthur wasn't just giving me bad medical advice. He was deliberately using basic food chemistry to make sure my body was constantly battling toxins and indigestible starch, all while claiming he was keeping me safe. He was meticulously, coldly engineering my collapse. The shame was gone, burned away by the fury of the discovery. My son was not tired. He was calculated. He was not caring. He was criminal. I needed proof, and not just spoiled vegetables. I needed the motive, and I needed it on paper. The next morning I told Arthur on the phone that I was too dizzy to get out of bed, and that the pills he gave me for anxiety were making me too sleepy to think. I had to sell the performance of my life. "Just rest, Mom," he cooed. "I'll stop by later and put the apartment key in your spare room drawer. Don't you worry about a thing." I knew where he kept important papers. In the small filing cabinet in my spare room, under his old medical journals. He always used that drawer when he came over. When he left the key and the door shut, I didn't rush. I waited 15 minutes, counting every tick of the wall clock, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I dragged myself up, ignoring the faint nausea. I hadn't eaten anything he'd delivered yet, and shuffled to the spare room. My hands were shaking as I pulled open the drawer. There they were, beneath a thick stack of medical magazines, bound by a rubber band. First, the life insurance policy. It was thick professional paper. Payout, $450,000. All going directly to Arthur Vance, my sole beneficiary. And right next to it, stapled to the policy, was the application for the Sunrise Luxury Care Facility. It wasn't a low-cost nursing home. It was a high-end retirement complex. The application was marked urgent. The initial deposit was due in 3 weeks. Arthur needed the money from the life insurance, plus the quick sale of my apartment, to cover the facility's steep cost, and still have enough left over for the down payment on the lake house Brenda wanted. He wasn't just putting me away. He was rushing my death to meet a financial deadline. The papers slipped out of my numb fingers and scattered on the floor. I didn't know which hurt more. The thought of him putting me out to pasture, or the fact that he was banking on my death for a recreational property. This was not a mistake. This was premeditated. He wasn't just using the spoiled food to make me sick. He was using my supposed anxiety as a way to prove my mental incompetence on paper so he could sign the documents necessary for the sale. The shame I felt earlier was nothing compared to this profound grief. My whole body seized up, and I fell back against the filing cabinet, struggling to breathe. I almost gave up right then. The pain of the betrayal, the sheer depth of his coldness, was overwhelming. It felt like the poisoned food had finally won. I spent the rest of that day curled up, aching, dizzy, and weeping into my pillow. I thought about giving up, letting him win. It would be easier. But then I thought of the lake house, I thought of Brenda selling my mother's old sewing machine to buy some tacky modern art. And I thought of Arthur, smiling that slick, expensive smile while he signed the papers that called me crazy and wrote me off. No, I would not let them win. Arthur wanted me to fail, but I had one thing he didn't: knowledge. He didn't know I had seen the papers. He didn't know I had talked to Lydia. I had 3 weeks until that deposit was due. 3 weeks to go from frail victim to formidable opponent. The first step was survival. I called Lydia again, keeping my voice low and weak. Lydia, I need help. I need to get better, fast, but I can't let him know. Lydia, bless her heart, understood immediately. One day at a time. Dottie, we start with the food. No more of Arthur's groceries. I'll bring you things he won't notice. The first thing we did was clear the fridge. I threw out the bag of soggy potatoes, the hard bread, and the soft, sprouting garlic. The very act of throwing them away felt like taking back control. Lydia then taught me the simple rules Arthur had inverted. She showed me how to set up a small, dark, ventilated basket in the pantry for the potatoes, explaining they needed to be kept warm, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, to stop the toxic starch-to-sugar conversion. It's simple chemistry, Dottie. He used basic food science against you. I started eating only food I prepared or food Lydia brought. Simple, fresh vegetables and proper toast stored on the counter. Within 3 days, I felt a noticeable change. The constant gnawing heaviness in my stomach began to lift. The painful gas started to diminish. I could walk across the room without feeling like the world was spinning. I realized Arthur's entire strategy depended on my constant, visible decline. If I started improving, he would lose his justification for the facility and the money. I couldn't let that happen. The recovery had to be secret. I had to play the long game. I had to become the frailest, most incompetent old lady Arthur had ever seen. I started taking secret measurements of my health. My blood pressure had been dangerously high. 165/95. During my worst decline, Arthur said it was my age. I asked Lydia if she knew any simple tricks. She found something online for me, right there in the laundry room. Dottie, this says if you do deep, rhythmic breathing, inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, wait for 4, and do that for just 2 minutes. It can reduce the top number of your blood pressure by as much as 18 points. I was skeptical. Easier said than done, I thought, but I had nothing to lose. I sat down and did the breathing. In, hold, out, wait. I did it for exactly 2 minutes, timing myself on my watch. I took my blood pressure again. It went from 162/94 to the 145/85. I stared at the numbers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a solid, undeniable drop. My own body was healing itself because I finally had the right information. Arthur's medicine had failed. Lydia's research had worked. I started doing that breathing exercise 3 times a day, every day, in secret. I knew I needed hard evidence against Arthur, something that would stand up in court. I found an old, cheap digital voice recorder my grandson had given me years ago for Christmas. It was tiny. I taped it beneath the kitchen counter, aimed directly at the area where Arthur and Brenda always talked business, convinced I was deaf, doped, or asleep. I made sure I took photos of the ruined food before I tossed it. The refrigerated garlic that was starting to get soft, and the mold spots on the onions. Proof of his care. Arthur was getting nervous. He kept calling, asking if I was using the pill organizers he left. I told him the pills made me too fuzzy. "Mom, you need those pills. They treat the anxiety that's causing your stomach issues," he said, his voice tightening. "Oh, Arthur, I'm trying. But I'm just so weak. I can barely hold the pill bottle." I lied, my voice wavering perfectly. He saw the window closing. The 3-week deadline was coming up fast. On Friday, the call came. He didn't bother to hide his urgency. "Mom, I've scheduled the appraiser for the apartment on Tuesday morning," Arthur said, trying to sound casual. "It's just an estimate for insurance purposes. Don't worry. Brenda and I will be there to handle it. Tuesday, 3 days away." He wasn't waiting for the full 3 weeks. He was accelerating the process. He needed the appraisal done while I was still completely incapacitated in his eyes, so he could forge the necessary paperwork for guardianship and sale. I put the phone down, my hand steady. The panic was gone, replaced by a crystalline focus. I had been eating safe food for almost 2 weeks. My stomach felt better, my mind was sharp, and my blood pressure was consistently in the low end of the red zone, not the high end, thanks to the 2-minute breathing exercise. I was ready. I called Ms. Chen, a sharp lawyer Mrs. Henderson's niece had recommended, and scheduled an emergency meeting. I showed her the insurance policy, the facility application, and the pictures of the ruined food. I told her about the voice recorder. Ms. Chen listened quietly. "Dottie, your son is attempting to commit elder abuse and financial fraud, disguised as medical care. This is a clear case of forced decline. We can stop this. We can use that Tuesday appraisal as the setting for the confrontation. But you have to be there, Dottie. You have to be strong." "I'll be there," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. I spent the weekend rehearsing. I practiced walking upright without the wobble. I practiced speaking clearly. Then, I practiced the performance. The slow shuffle, the weak cough, the whispered words. I was Dottie the seamstress, and I was about to stitch up the biggest, most important piece of theater of my life. Sunday arrived. Arthur and Brenda came over, all smiles and false sympathy. Arthur insisted I take my pills. "Just a little something to calm the nerves, Mom," he said, handing me a glass of water, and the small white pill he insisted was anti-anxiety. I swallowed the pill, or rather, I pretended to. I palmed it in my mouth, ensuring the bitter taste of medication didn't stay on my tongue. And then, while Brenda was turning her back to look at the living room carpet with disdain, I dropped the pill into the potted plant next to my armchair. I was already feeling strong, energized by the safe food and the knowledge I held. "Just rest, Mom," Brenda murmured, patting my frail hand with a condescending smile. "Just rest until Tuesday." As Arthur and Brenda walked toward the kitchen, discussing their expensive lake house plans in hushed, excited tones, I slipped the recording device from its hiding spot beneath the counter. I looked at my hand. It was steady. I was no longer Dottie, the sick old seamstress waiting to die. I was the witness, the investigator, and soon, the judge. I pressed the record button and smiled, knowing that by Tuesday, when the appraiser arrived, I would not be in bed. I would be ready to expose Arthur and Brenda's cold, calculated plan for the entire world to hear. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story will travel. Tuesday, 10 o'clock in the morning. My small living room, the one Brenda hated, was packed. The air was thick with expectation, though only 4 people knew the true reason for the gathering. Arthur and Brenda sat stiffly on my sofa, radiating impatience and false competence. Arthur was adjusting his expensive suit jacket. Brenda kept glancing at her wristwatch, eager for the formalities to end. Next to them sat Mr. Davies, the apartment appraiser, looking distinctly bored as he scribbled notes. I had entered slowly, supported by Lydia, playing the role of the frail invalid perfectly. I was seated in my old armchair, clutching a glass of water, nodding vaguely at Arthur's patronizing questions. Then the door opened for the last time. Arthur and Brenda froze. Their faces, usually composed, cracked instantly when they saw the reinforcements. First came Ms. Chen, my lawyer, crisp and professional. Behind her stood Sergeant Miller of the Elder Fraud Unit, his uniform an impossible shock in my quiet living room. Beside him was an unfamiliar man, Dr. Hemlock, a forensic food safety specialist. "What in God's name is this, Mom?" Arthur stammered, half rising from the sofa, his eyes flicking wildly from the police officer to the attorney. "It's the appraisal, Arthur," I said, my voice thin and wobbly, maintaining the performance for one last second. I placed my glass of water down and pushed myself upright. I straightened my back, a movement I hadn't dared to make in his presence for months. I walked 3 deliberate steps toward the center of the room, my footing solid, my posture perfect. The exhaustion I had faked vanished. I stood firm, 70 years of working hard now, showing in the granite strength of my stance. Arthur gasped, a small, choked sound. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth, her face pale. Mr. Davies dropped his notepad. I looked at Arthur, the son who had meticulously tried to kill me. My eyes were completely dry, fixed on him with a hardness that surprised even me. "We're not appraising the apartment today, Arthur," I repeated, my voice now clear, resonant, and unwavering. "We're appraising your character." I placed a tiny black digital recorder onto the coffee table, directly in front of them. The silence in the room became absolute. I pressed play. Arthur's voice, chillingly casual, filled the room. "She won't improve, dear. The specialists told us there's no cure for this anxiety. And besides, I made sure of something. Her condition is getting worse, not better. We just need to wait a few more weeks, until she can't get up anymore." Brenda whimpered, reaching desperately for Arthur's arm. Arthur lunged forward, his face contorted with panic, trying to grab the recorder. Sergeant Miller stepped in swiftly, blocking him with an immovable presence. "Stay seated, Dr. Vance," the sergeant warned. Ms. Chen opened her briefcase and spread documents across the table. "Let's talk motive, Dr. Vance." She slid over the life insurance policy. "Payout of $450,000, payable to you upon death, correct?" Next came the application. "And the urgent application for the Sunrise Luxury Care Facility, due in 3 weeks, indicating the need for immediate funding for that lake house down payment your wife so desperately wants." Arthur was breathing hard, shaking his head rapidly. "Coincidence! Speculation! This is all circumstantial." I pulled out my phone and showed the photo gallery. One by one, I displayed the photos I had taken. The bag of potatoes kept cold next to the milk. The hard, green spots of mold forming on the refrigerated onions. The loaf of bakery bread squeezed into the damp bottom drawer. Lydia stepped forward, speaking with measured anger. "He used basic food chemistry against his own mother. He knows that cold converts potato starch to sugar, increasing the content by 300% in just 2 weeks, turning a simple meal into something toxic to a sensitive gut." Dr. Hemlock, the food specialist, nodded gravely. "The persistent high sugar intake, combined with the aflatoxins from moldy refrigerated onions, perfectly explains the severe gastrointestinal distress, bloating, and weakness, symptoms easily misdiagnosed as generalized anxiety or old age decline. I then presented my own secret evidence, the final proof that destroyed his medical credibility. Arthur diagnosed me with untreatable anxiety and gave me pills that only made me foggy. He said my blood pressure was high because of my age. I looked down at my watch. My blood pressure was 165/95 when I was listening to your lies, Arthur. I looked at him again, the triumph mixing with a deep, sorrowful revulsion. Lydia showed me a simple rhythmic breathing technique. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, wait for 4. Do it for 2 minutes. Arthur, that simple trick, researched online, dropped my blood pressure by 17 points in 2 minutes. Your medicine failed, Arthur. My simple breathing exercise worked. Arthur crumbled. He put his head in his hands, his expensive haircut ruined by sweat. "Mom, please," he cried, lifting his desperate tear-streaked face. "You can't do this. I am your son. We love you. Think of everything I've done for you, the sacrifices. You're going to send your own blood to prison? You will destroy us. We are your family." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice, but my response hit him like a physical blow. I spent 69 years hunched over a sewing machine, stitching my dreams and fixing other people's skirts, sacrificing every spare penny to put you through medical school so you could become a healer. My voice was low, gelid, utterly devoid of maternal feeling. You tried to poison my body with a 300% sugar spike and used my own anxiety against me to steal $450,000. You stopped being my son the moment you calculated my death to buy a lake house. You are just a criminal wearing his face. I do not know you. Sergeant Miller moved swiftly. He pulled Arthur's arms behind his back and clicked the handcuffs shut. "Dr. Vance, you are under arrest for attempted felony assault, medical fraud, and elder abuse." Arthur was led away, his expensive shoes shuffling uselessly on my worn carpet. Brenda, pale and frantic, rose to follow him. I stopped her by placing the restraining order and divorce papers Ms. Chen had prepared on the table. "You are complicit, Brenda," I said, looking right through her. "You will never set foot here again." The apartment fell silent, broken only by the sound of Mr. Davies, the appraiser, hastily packing his papers, trying to disappear. Justice, I realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, precise, and utterly final. The legal repercussions were swift and devastating. Arthur Vance was convicted of attempted homicide for the calculated, prolonged nature of the physical decline he engineered, and multiple counts of medical fraud and elder abuse. He was sentenced to 12 years of reclusion in regime closed. He was immediately and permanently stripped of his medical license by the state board, his clinic shut down, and his reputation utterly destroyed. The court ordered him to pay me $600,000 in combined damages for the emotional trauma, medical costs, and loss of quality of life I had endured. Brenda, after failing to prove she was ignorant of Arthur's intent, faced heavy civil penalties. She filed for divorce from Arthur but was left financially destitute, losing the down payment she had scraped together for the lake house and having to forfeit any claim on Arthur's remaining assets, which were all seized. The entire community, reading the shocking details in the local newspaper, collectively cut Arthur off. He received no familial visits, not even from the friends he believed were his loyal colleagues. Arthur Vance, the successful, polished doctor, became inmate 4099 at the state penitentiary, serving his time alone, isolated, and powerless. He had wanted my life insurance and my apartment. Instead, he lost his career, his freedom, and was forced to fund the very future he tried to extinguish. 2 years later, at 71 years old, I am stronger than I ever was at 69. I lost 25 pounds of toxic bloat and water retention from eating Arthur's spoiled food, weight I will never regain. My blood pressure, which was dangerously high at 165/95 during my forced decline, now sits consistently at a healthy 125/80, maintained entirely through diet and the rhythmic breathing exercise that Lydia found for me. I take no anxiety medication, and my digestive system is perfectly sound. I used the $600,000 of settlement money wisely. After paying off Ms. Chen and the remaining mortgage on my apartment, making it finally, truly mine, I used the rest of the funds to establish the Dottie Miller Project. It is not an impersonal, large foundation, but a small, focused community group dedicated to empowering the elderly in my neighborhood against medical misinformation and financial abuse. Lydia is my chief coordinator. We hold meetings every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, right here in my living room, the space Arthur and Brenda scorned. We teach simple, life-saving information. I always start with the science. Arthur twisted. Don't put your potatoes in the fridge, ladies. That cold converts the starch to sugar by 300%. Store them in a cool, dark basket, around 50 degrees, like we learned. We teach the 2-minute breathing exercise and measure the blood pressure drop right there in the living room, showing them proof that they can reclaim control over their own bodies. We have helped over 200 families identify signs of abuse and neglect. The apartment Arthur wanted to sell has become a safe haven, a center of radical independence and quiet rebellion. I often walk to my kitchen, running my hand over the dark wood of the pantry basket, where the potatoes now rest safely, cool and dry. I smile when I think of Arthur, confined and stripped of his privilege, while I, the supposed victim, am thriving, busy, and full of purpose. He wanted me to die eating poisoned food so he could start his life fresh. Instead, he taught me exactly how to live free. I look at my small, sturdy home, filled now with the sound of laughter and purpose. I am 71, healthy, and rich in the ways that truly matter. He buried the sick old woman, but he didn't bury my courage. And the most satisfying form of revenge is the one measured not by years in prison, but by the healthy drop in blood pressure and the sheer, unadulterated pleasure of staying alive. And if you stayed with me until the end, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the story and what kinds of stories you'd like to read more of. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next emotional story.